Geek Out! Look, up in the sky. It's a bird.
It's a plane.
It's a podcast about Superman. Alrighty, and we're back. Superman Sessions, episode 3, although really episode 2, because that first one was just like introductory.
It was a foreword.
Yeah, It's a prologue. Anyway, I am Jake, and with me is young Samuel.
Hey, how's it going?
Today we have a very special guest. All of our guests are very special, but this one's very special. Very, very special because it is one of our oldest and dearest and bestest friends. I've told the story before, but we met years ago at the comic shop.
4 years ago.
Yeah, is it 4 years ago? Mm-hmm. At the comic shop that, that obviously she worked at, and then I worked at for a couple years. And when I opened the door, like, she was the most, like, energetic, excited, passionate person about comics I ever met, which definitely informed me later on and helped me stay in, passionate with comics. And pretty much at the time, I was like a bum with no money in between jobs. And so she was like pouring her heart out, trying to get me to read all these books. In my head, I was like, I could buy like a single issue. And so that's what I did. And I think the story goes, she thought like I was like upset or didn't like the fact, which is I was just too embarrassed to say I had like no money.
And there's also the RBF factor.
RBF?
Resting bitch face.
Oh, yeah, we both have that. Yeah, we both have a pretty mean resting bitch face. And, but no. So anyway, Luther Strode comes along. That was one that she recommended. And I was thinking about it. We've talked to the creators of Luther Strode.
Yeah. Was it that or Bedlam that really kicked it off?
Bedlam started, but then like one day she kind of like really was like, I kind of know what you like, which is just masks and violence. And was like, check this out. And I read the first volume cover to cover that night and was like, holy shit. And we've been like best friends ever since. Of course, I am talking about Corey Murphy. Welcome to the show.
Hey guys, how you doing?
Fantastic. And it's funny, I was thinking, back, like I said, we've a lot of what the Geek Out show has become is a huge part to you and the wonderful people at Image Comics.
Yeah,
because,
this wouldn't exist.
Yeah, and one of the cool things is, like I said, we interviewed Justin Jordan and Trad Moore for president.
You were going to say Luther
and Luther Strode. we interviewed Luther Strode. And so, like I said, that just like and that being a kind of an important book, I think, in our relationship as friends and whatnot. And like I said, like honestly, I love the way you talk about comics, whether you love them or you don't love them. Either way, it's great. It's very passionate and it's very easy to want to read something when someone talks passionately about something, and you do that very well. And
pro or con,
yes, exactly, pro or con. And one of the things that you're very passionate about, and we've talked many times about, is Superman. And so, of course, this is a Superman podcast, but not exclusively just only about Superman. Corey, if for the lovely people, the millions and billions of people listening to this podcast, if you could give us a little bit of background on how you kind of started your journey in the comics and the first time you came across the Man of Steel.
Well, I think a lot of the stories of how people got into comics is kind of a similar thread to it. Is I had a hard time learning how to read as a kid, and it wasn't until I was probably in first grade where they realized I was dyslexic. And, after struggling for a while and feeling like I was just a kid in the class who couldn't keep up, I started to really kind of take off. And once I had some help learning to kind of flip the letters around in my head or identify what I was seeing is not necessarily what's on the page, one of the tools that my school used was comics. And, I had family who read comics. And once I kind of heard that was helping me, I got a lot of comics from family members. And some of my first comics were Frank Miller's Daredevil, which was pretty, it was much later. I was probably like maybe fourth grade or so when I really started reading, traditional comics outside of kind of educational comics that are to kind of help you get a handle on reading. Those were my first kind of exposure to actual comics, American comics. Mm-hmm. But so which I think actually is a good explanation and like a segue into why I love Superman so much. Because as for anyone who's read any Frank Miller, it's pretty dark and, you know, gritty and super raw, and I love that, and it's super exciting to kind of delve into when that wasn't really what was happening in comics during that time period. And, you know, he took a character that was super campy and totally ripped him inside out and made him something totally new and different. But then that became kind of like the norm, and there's been kind of a whole resurgence, especially in the cinematic universe, but also in comics, just going super dark and raw and gritty, and that kind of everything tastes like ash in your mouth. That's all well and good, but every now and again, it's nice to be reminded what our best qualities are as people and why we do have heroes and what those virtues are. And when you have those moral, you know, pillars, what you do when faced with absolute evil or when faced with saving the planet versus one person. And Superman kind of just really embodies what the best of us could look like, and what we could do if we had the power to actually make significant change on, you know, a superhuman level. And I think that's one of those things that people who try and redo Superman as dark and gritty, or, you know, it just doesn't work for me. It just kind of goes against everything that Superman stands for, in my mind. I know it's something that Jake and I have talked about a lot. And actually, to kind of bring us back to when I first met you guys, I think the first thing I actually suggested to you guys was Jeff Lemire.
Yes.
Essex County.
And Jeff Lemire has there's one issue, I think it was the first issue, Adventures with Superman.
Yeah.
I think that issue has like a 3-parter in it. I can't remember exactly what the storyline was, but it's just Superman sitting on top of like a house watching these kids play.
Yeah, I remember because he draws it as well, and
he does. Yeah,
it captures like the childhood like imagination and fun of superheroes because it's 2 kids.
They get to trade.
And they trade. They're playing Superman. And whenever they say they're like, I'm Brainiac now, they become Brainiac, you know? And they're fighting and this and that, and they're talking about why they love Superman. And as the camera, so to speak, zooms out, sitting on top of the barn is Superman with a smile on his face. And I think I remember, it was probably you showed me that, and that was just like perfect. And that's something that I think is so great about Superman. You don't have to have necessarily like an end of the world scenario or something, even like a conflict. I mean, there's no real the conflict in that issue is these 2 kids, which one gets to be Superman? You know what I mean?
And they trade.
Yeah. And we've all done that. We've all put the towel on our back, our Superman pajamas, and run around. And I do think that is one of the more endearing moments in Man of Steel, is that, you know, the young Clark with the cape on his back striking the Superman pose, because that's universal. You know, you don't need to even speak the same language to know what that means. And I think tapping into that is so important with Superman. And like you said, for some reason, as much as we all love Frank Miller, like, people think that that's the way to go with dark and, you know, with characters, and that only works for dark and gritty characters.
And I think a lot of that kind of comes from people, mostly movie execs, taking the wrong lessons from The Dark Knight. They're just like, oh, it isn't people like really well-conceived stories. They like dark and gritty stories.
Well, yeah, and they love the idea of everything has to be grounded. And I remember when Man of Steel was coming out, everyone was like, it's grounded. And I'm like, it doesn't matter how grounded you make it. When he takes off and flies and has heat vision out of his eyeballs, it's not grounded anymore. It's literally not grounded anymore. You're floating in the air. And so, right. and that's something that, you know, hopefully, I mean, like I said, I love Henry Cavill, and I hope one day he gets the chance to really, you know, really embody Superman. But one of the things I knew we were going to talk about a lot on this, and I'm excited because the last time I watched this movie was my favorite time I ever watched this movie. And ladies and gentlemen, I have the 2 foremost experts on Superman Returns at the same time on the same podcast. If this doesn't get at least
Hi, I'm Mark Wade.
Yeah. If this doesn't get at least 1.7 billion like downloads, then we didn't do something right, because this is like
Jake, we never do something right.
this is top level like shit. Anyway, Superman Returns is what we're going to talk about for the most part. I think that's where the conversation is going, which is fine, because I know Sam, we've talked about it a lot on the show before. That's your favorite Superman film.
Yeah.
And Corey Murphy, I know you love Superman Returns. So hit us with start the conversation with what it is about Superman Returns, because like I said, I am not.
Well,
I've had a very complicated relationship, but like I said, I do quite enjoy that movie now.
I think especially, I mean, in the context of Man of Steel, rewatching Superman Returns, it's all the more sweet. It does really reconfirms everything that I like about that movie and everything I don't like about Man of Steel. First of all, there's only really two actors who I feel like, at least modern renditions of Superman, really captures what that character is about for me. Is Tom Welling and Brandon Routh. And they have this wholesome goodness and just upstanding, American values, universal values that kind of cross over for every nationality, that doing the right thing, protecting those who can't protect themselves, and sacrificing yourself for those you love or don't know, all of those qualities that we hope to actually be able to carry out. And when the situation calls for, I believe them that they would do it. As much as I know you love your man in Man of Steel, who I'm, for whatever reason, can't think of his name at the moment, Henry Cavill.
Yeah.
He is super wooden to me and has no depth. But Brandon Routh, I feel like really kind of, and a lot of that is he's really going old school and kind of throwing out a lot of the mannerisms and even the vocal quality I think we're used to hearing from Superman. And I think that's probably what a lot of Sam's love for that movie comes in. And maybe I'm wrong there, but
I mean, there are certain elements I love. I actually like the idea that his biggest, on some level, the Lois's arc, she ends the film by writing that article, Why the World Needs Superman, and it kind of has that's the driving question behind it. Also, I think Brandon Routh does an underrated job.
He never got to my problem with the movie isn't necessarily anything to do with Brandon Routh. It's the fact that, and this is not a Superman Returns only thing that happens. It's that problem where they never got to, it's tied so closely to the Donnerverse, which I think at the end of the day, of course, the John Williams score is iconic. I actually think what's his face, Hans Zimmer did a pretty good job with the more modern Man of Steel vibe.
Yeah, that my problem with Man of Steel is not the score.
Of course, yeah. But again, I think I would have liked to have seen that movie break free of the Donnerverse a little bit, because it's so, and it does that thing where it's like it's not really a sequel, but it is a sequel. It's a spiritual successor, blah blah blah. And I wish we could have got Brandon Routh, a little bit more Brandon Routh, because of course he does a great job of what he's asked in that movie. Because he's given so much and he has such big shoes to fill. I mean, he is the first live action guy since Christopher Reeve. He is he has and he's like an unknown dude. He won like a Superman lookalike contest, for like Halloween or something. But yeah, and it's funny, like rewatching it, like I've been doing it since, it really was available on like DVD or whatever. And especially meeting Sam and then meeting you, Corey, like watching and looking for those moments. And I think Man of Steel did help me appreciate Superman Returns more, because there's a scene in that movie that will fucking keep me alive a minute longer on my deathbed that is so quick, but it is like the best thing in the world, is when he is saving Metropolis. And it is the scene where he sees the Daily Planet dome is about to crush people, and he flies he flies like through the Daily Planet, like just smashes through the windows, all the papers go everywhere, and then he lands, not lands, but he pops out the other side to catch it just in time. I have a little statue of that. Like that is like the coolest. I like, And the idea of like him saving Metropolis, you know, burning the glass and turning into sand.
Yeah, flying through the sewers and the mains.
You get the how tiring it would be to be Superman, because that movie also shows him like saving people like across, like in like Japan and China and stuff, right?
Yeah, and that's what Man of Steel is missing. Like, you don't get him saving people.
Yeah.
You get him fighting the villain and blowing up buildings and, you know, learning about his heritage, sort of. You don't actually get him saving anyone. And I think what it all boils down to, what is a quintessential performance of Superman really comes down to the performance of Clark Kent.
Mm-hmm.
And if that's not there, or we don't get to actually know him as Clark Kent, we have these little flashback sequences in Man of Steel, and these little asides that, you know, Ma and Clark Kent, like, but it doesn't really give us a sense of who he is or how he's gotten there. It kind of plays on the fact that we already know those things. But I think Return of Superman, you actually really get to see him as Clark Kent. And really nothing is as satisfying. And, you know, it took me, actually, I guess like 2 years ago, it wasn't until Jake was pushing me to do it that we started watching Smallville.
Mm-hmm.
And that, I think, replaces my favorite. If we're doing favorite movies, definitely Return of Superman. But if we're talking just favorite Superman, it's Smallville.
Yeah.
And, you know, you could argue that it's not really his favorite Superman, it's just Clark Kent. Becoming Superman, you get to see him grow and learn and face himself in ways that he didn't think possible. But I guess it's just his struggles and learning how to be the hero that he's going to grow up to be is all about who that character is to me. And it's one of those things that is so lost in other comics, especially now. And that's something that, you know, we've actually been talking a lot about in our company. It's just, you know, at Image, what's missing in comics, and it's fun. It's like there's nothing really anymore where you've had a really hard day or you've watched the news and it feels like an actual comic book moment where everything is on fire. There's nuclear wars, you know, topic like on the precipice, and you've got an actual villain in the White House.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you feel like I need something to remind me that, you know, there are good people out there and that there's hope and that there are qualities in all of us that we can tap into. And, you know, it's hard when you walk into a store and you're just like, oh, God, people's faces ripped off and people getting tortured. And just, it's not really a great feeling sometimes when you look at what our modern heroes are doing. And, yeah, I guess that's kind of like where superhero comics have gone. And a lot of the reason why I think the Marvel Cinematic Universe has more success over DC is they do have that sense of fun. Well, I think they've totally tapped it out and kind of turned into a split machine.
Yeah.
It's still fun when it actually hits well. And Superman does have that element where he can have lighthearted fun, along with those darker, sadder moments. And that's what I really am drawn to more recently, in the last couple of years. But even when, you know, I first started reading comics and you first have little glimpses of those character moments, and even in the last 5 years, I think a lot of, I know Jake and I talked about this moment a lot in Charles Soule's Swamp Thing. There's an aside with Superman in what I want to say is some kind of greenhouse situation or like a museum of some sort, and he asks Superman, you know, how do you do it? How, when you have the power you have, how do you keep yourself in check? And he basically tells him, you can't, but you have to try. Every day you have to try. And it's just kind of a reminder that, you know, it's not like Batman where his alter ego seems to be Bruce. It's not actually Batman. But you have this really human person on the inside, which is such an interesting thing about Superman because he's not human, but he's the most human of all the heroes. And that really just comes back to, you know, his upbringing and his parents. And I think a great flip on that is Mark Miller's Red Son. and you get to say, like, okay, well, what happens if Superman landed in Soviet Russia? And it's just such a flip. And, like, Elseworlds comics can be really fun, but I don't think they're often very thoughtful. And that's one of those stories where you can really actually put them side by side and be like, holy shit. Like, yeah, he is all of those things people are so terrified of. He is a war machine and, a god, and could actually bring an entire world to heel if he wanted to. And that's what I really enjoy about that book. Not necessarily that it's Dark Superman, but really kind of shows you the power he could wield if he went dark.
Yeah, and like you kind of touched on it already, but I mean, do you find Superman as, a relatable character? Because I think that's one of the big things, and I'm curious, with each guest we have on, what they think, because that's something where I'd always get kind of like crazy looks at the comic shop when people would, say, Batman's the most relatable because he's human and anyone could be Batman. And I've always said, like, well, no, because, he's a billionaire, and hopefully you haven't seen your parents shot, and experienced that kind of trauma in front of you in a dark alleyway. Yeah. I have seen The Mark of Zorro many times, but I've no intention to be Batman. But again, like, that idea for me is that Superman is an exaggerated version of living your best life. And
for sure.
Yeah.
That's why he goes to the big city. And his best true self just happens to be the greatest hero we'll ever know.
Mm-hmm. So
I think he's one of the most relatable characters. The struggle he has of kind of maintaining all of the things he wants to be with what the world asks of him, and then keeping in check all of that when he's Clark Kent. It boils down to a lot of the same stuff we deal with, but just, on a bigger scale.
Mm-hmm.
I think his upbringing is probably, well, I didn't grow up in middle America and on a farm, but like there's, I think, something about his childhood, and especially the way he gets to experience it in Smallville, it feels really accessible. He's not, sure, Tom Welling is gorgeous, and there's no doubt about that, and for him to not be the most popular kid at the school is kind of a stretch, but like the fact that he isn't, and he's kind of, on the outskirts, and he can't play football, and he can't be who he wants to be. He's kind of has to be cautious of everything he says and does, and how he carries himself, how much strength he puts into everything he does. It's especially as a teenager, you're already so hyper aware of how you're growing up and everything people think of you and what you're doing and who you are, and not being sure about what you want out of life and all of those questions that come into your mind. And then you add in this extra element. It just really heightens what I think most teenagers are already so terrified of. And, being able to watch that through the eyes of Superman, and as he kind of figures out his life and his parents, it seems pretty relatable. And that's, I think, his childhood is always so present in his adult life, which, Batman is sure when he wants to like scream Martha and talk about pearls, like that's like it, like it's kind of like a cheap shot. Yeah. But it does really actually. The trauma has made him who he is, but it's not something where he's pulling from his life lessons. Every now and again you'll have something from Thomas Wayne pop up where he has a memory, but that's really more in the movies, where you get some crappy flashback, why do we fall type of crap, and it's like, okay, well, Clark, it's so inherently apparent how he's become who he is. And it's not through, an accident in the lab or traumatic experience or, some other kind of like freak element. It's because he's different than the rest of us, but raised to be the same. And I think that it's also that otherness that is, obviously especially kind of poignant with the DSCA being, on the table like it is right now, that otherness and being an alien in your homeland is such a strange sensation and also inherently American. And something that, I think it's really easy to kind of not focus on, but for super fans of Superman, I think it's something you think about when you're reading him or watching him, is that he's protecting people he has no patronage towards. He doesn't have to actually help any of us. He does. So I love Superman. If it isn't apparent, I think he's great.
You're on the right show, yeah.
He's the best.
I mean, you know, one of the things that I always identified with the character growing up is, in a way, he's kind of two cultures, but neither culture at the same time. You know, he's, you know, from Krypton. He'll never know Krypton. Grew up in Kansas. You know, I'll never really know Korean culture. Not, you know, I'm from it, but I'll never know it. But I'll always, but it also sets me apart from Anglo-American culture here. So that was always something that attracted me to that character. And yeah, certainly the idea, but a bigger question I had for you, Corey, something that we've kind of covered in the two-ish episodes we've done of this show. I think everyone has a period, and I don't know if it coincides with like teenagedom and rebelling against social norms at the time, where they kind of have that falling out, or like, hey, Superman's kind of lame or whatever. And I was wondering and then something that, you know, inevitably brings them back. I was wondering if you ever had that kind of falling out or that distancing with Superman, and what brought you back.
Well, actually, for me, Superman was kind of my falling out from things like Frank Miller's Daredevil, or, you know, something super dark and gritty, where I needed like a palate cleanser. And for all seasons, it's one of the things that you first dive into, and you're like, oh my God, this is so nice. And like, I feel a sense of hope, and, you know, you kind of origin story in a way that most origin stories aren't handled. But for me, it wasn't like a falling out and a return. It was mostly just kind of a initial discovery. You know, Superman was not one of those characters I grew up with. I think it was one of the ones that I kind of turned to when I was burned out on comics altogether. Which is, I think, a lot of people, I mean, a lot of the retailers I talk to have a similar experience. And it's just, you get burned out of all of the gore and all of the violence and just despair all the time in all the comics. And every now and again, it's nice to have, you know, a hopeful book, even if it is just darker moments. It's nice to actually have moments of hope. So for me, it was going to Superman in earnest for the first time, you know, later on into my comics relationship, I guess.
Do you have like kind of stories that you would point someone to, whether like first time readers or just like, I know you mentioned you know, Red Sun, and for, you know, obviously Superman Returns and Smallville, which is on Hulu, by the way, people. If you have a Hulu account, it is available finally to stream somewhere, because it's really, you know, it is a little long in the tooth as it gets there, but the payoff and like I said, the finale for me is just absolutely perfect. But do you have kind of stories you would kind of say, hey, this is what you guys should check out?
Probably for someone who's super on the fence about Superman, and he was just like, no way, how is it cool as Batman? Never read Superman. I would definitely point to Red Sun first. Mm-hmm. Just because I think a lot of times it's one of those ones where people can actually get to know that character and what he's capable of. If you want to talk about just power, which for a lot of people who are superhero fans, it's like this weird cred that they're like, my favorite superhero kicks your favorite superhero's ass. And then, you know, there's something to that. Like the argument that constantly comes up is, you know, who would win, Batman or Superman? I'm like, it's Superman. Mm-hmm. Clear. Yeah. But it's a good one to kind of just say, like, if you want to see what that character is capable of, start there. I'm a really big fan of Superman Birthright. Mm-hmm. Definitely Secret Identity is a fun one too. I think Superman has really leans well towards like standalone storytelling, just because you do want to take your time and kind of see like both sides of his life. I mean, those are probably my favorites. There's moments kind of within, I mean, for all seasons, it's definitely my all-time favorite. All-Star Superman has some really beautiful moments in it that I think is really easy to kind of overlook.
Mm-hmm. And that's also a pretty like intense Superman read. Like that's almost like a final exam.
Well, anything with Grant Morrison.
Yeah. Well, Grant Morrison, you were talking earlier about like how the world is unfortunately in kind of this like destruction mode and just on all fronts. And it reminded me of this story that Grant Morrison always told, who's, he's just one of those guys I just love the way, we were talking about his Animal Man run, which is just like phenomenal. And just the way he looks at books. But one of the most like just like kind of like wonderful, endearing moments what he talked about was, he grew up in like the age of like nuclear holocaust. Like, everyone was afraid that today was going to be their last day. And
because the NATO nuclear subs were right near where he lived.
Yeah. And his parents were like super hippie protesters who would like, were fighting to get, make sure this doesn't happen and whatnot. And he would have this dream every single night, or maybe not every single night, but for the sake of the story, we'll say every single night, that a nuclear bomb would go off and destroy him and kill him. And it was horrible. And then he read his first Superman comic book. And he said that night he had the dream again, but Superman walked through the nuclear bomb like it was nothing and told him it was going to be okay. And he said that moment as like a 5-year-old. People always ask him like, can superheroes save lives? Can comic books save lives? And he's like, absolutely. Like you reading Superman as a kid stopped that fear. It's always going to be there. But if a character on a page can help extinguish the fear even for a moment of that. I mean, that's powerful stuff. And, I think someone like Grant Morrison or Mark Waid or John Byrne, people who kind of etch their names on the Mount Rushmore of Superman writers, they understand that importance.
Well, Morrison has, and, I think, Corey, you may have first pointed out this moment. There is that beautiful moment in All-Star where he's trying to save Metropolis and the world from whatever fuckery is going around, because everything goes to shit at one point in that book. Mm-hmm. And he takes the time to divert and save that one person that's, thinking about committing suicide. He's like, look, your doctor did get held up. You're always going to be stronger than you actually think you are.
Yeah.
And there's a similar moment in Thy Kingdom Come, the Jeff Johns Justice Society story, where Kingdom Come Superman's like hanging out and he busts through he's being held captive by the Justice Society. He breaks through all of them just to stop another person from committing suicide. And he's just like, giving up never helped anyone, ma'am. It's just those little moments like that. That's what, and I feel like DC had kind of gotten away with that with like the New 52, and what I'm loving about Rebirth is kind of reinstilling those values into the character.
Yeah, and I will, for as many episodes as we do of this, I will push the Superman Rebirth stuff, because like Superman Returns, I never got the whole Superman like having a kid. I was not interested in that whatsoever, but what they're doing in the Superman title with him having a kid and him being a father and having the fears of being a father, but also being the world's greatest superhero and trying to teach his son about having powers, but also being responsible. It's like, I don't know. It's just the most Superman thing you could think of. And it's, and then one of my favorite moments is you get to see angry dad Superman, where Damian kidnaps John, his son, and Superman, like Batman's like, what the fuck have you done, Damian? Because that was not on Batman's, like, he was not planning that. And Batman's like, we have to return him. It's only a matter of time till, and you hear a rumble and he goes, oh God. And like the Batcave just explodes and Superman is in silhouette with the red eyes. And he's like, where is my son? And then, you get kind of Batman and Superman, both having kids and kind of bonding over that. It's really interesting stuff, and we've all kind of like talked about this individually on just in person, whatever, on the show, whatever. For as big and as epic of a character Superman is, those small moments are the sweetest moments with Superman.
Well, and there's so many moments like that too in the comics. Like, I think another one that's super kind of captures that, him cutting loose in a way that's almost more Superman than if he would just always be like that, is what's so funny about Truth, Justice in the American Way.
Yeah.
Joe Kelly, when Superman finally left loose against the elite, after like everyone kind of coming around to turn him into the villain, it's like, it's a reminder of you paint me as this character that holds back, or that is too weak. but really, you know, that's the strongest thing about me. And like, this is why, what happens when I don't do that. And then you've got another little like quiet, I mean, maybe not quiet, but for The Man Who Was Everything, you know, Alan Moore shows Superman, you know, kind of envisioning his perfect life, like what his heart wants more than anything, and that's to have a normal life on Krypton. Like, how depressing is that? Like, you have, like, you know, the moment of these are like flashes, you know, All-Star Superman, where he finds out that he's going to die, and it's basically him, like, going through his bucket list. It's kind of very, like, really human problems, and I think that you can kind of put through a totally different lens because he isn't human. But it just really makes you see those problems in a different way. But there's so many of those that just have those little quiet moments that I think can otherwise get lost in stuff that's so plot heavy. Superman kind of lends to those character moments a lot more than a lot of other books do.
Though if I recall, you know, to say something positive about Man of Steel, though I'm generally on the same page with you.
There's stuff.
If I remember, well, Corey, I remember and correct
Henry
me
Cavill's chest hair, Corey. You know, you're all about
the moment.
Oh, sorry, that was just me who liked the chest.
Yeah. I let me have Brandon Routh's digitally reduced penis. Anyway, the
that should be the name of the show.
Brandon Routh's digitally reduced penis.
And Superman Returns.
Yeah.
I would tune in.
And so would he.
Yeah. Hell yeah.
Yeah. What about my digitally reduced penis? Your favorite moment of Man of Steel, isn't it when he stops the world engine in the Indian Ocean and literally gives it everything he has? No, I'm talking to Corey.
Oh.
When he has that killer yell?
Yeah, basically.
Well, that is like, perhaps revealing too much about myself. Anytime a superhero has a good yell, is like, I love that. I like a fangirl moment. As a girl moment, I'm like, you know, I just adore seeing superheroes push past their limit and then fighting through. And, you know, if we're talking about greatest Superman yells, it doesn't even come close to Brandon Routh. It doesn't even come close. Like when he's lifting up that island filled with kryptonite, after he's been stabbed in the back and a piece of kryptonite broken off in his, like, kidney, and he's, like, screaming as he lifts that sucker into the air. And basically, you see that moment where he can't go any further, and he realizes he's going to die, and he says, fuck it, and he keeps going, and you're like, oh my god, Superman's dead. Just kidding, he's recharging, and then he comes back.
Though it
and
is,
he falls to the ground, and you're not sure if he's dead or not. But, you know, I guess it's the scream. It just felt like more of a show-off moment in Man of Steel versus an actual accomplishment.
Yeah, that's that movie in a nutshell.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because no, I mean, like that. You know, I've mentioned that a million times. Like that's my favorite moment in Man of Steel as well, because it does, in a very, 2 or 3 minutes, it does kind of show, like, he doesn't really know what he's getting into. He's getting thrown around by an octopus tentacle monster thing.
Ship.
Yeah, and he's coughing, which is weird. But like that shot of him just being beat down into the ground, and then intercutting with
almost punching the laser.
Yeah, I mean it's the Fleischer shit. But I mean the intercutting with Larry Fishburne, and they have that great moment where like they think they're gonna die and they just accept it, and then on the other side of the world, Superman shits his pants and flies into a giant monster. Yeah, he does scream a lot in that movie, which I remember thinking like, well, at least Corey has Superman screaming.
I have that moment.
Yeah, but I don't know. But no, one of the things I wanted to ask too, which will be a recurring question, is how do you look at Batman and Superman's relationship? Because it's something over the years that is really
also just the idea of Superman being in a shared universe at large.
Sure, yeah. But like I think something that has been kind of shown every single way is the relationship between Batman and Superman.
Well, I think that I think Superman is kind of Batman's conscience in a lot of ways, and his kind of like emotional core, and the one who kind of like calls him to check when he's doing something that's too far, or when he's gone past the point of return, and he's kind of always there to pull him back and pull him back and pull him back. I mean, I really enjoy their partnership. I think a lot of times, like, they kind of go kitschy with it, and where it's like, Superman's like, "Oh, Batman, you and your doomsday plans," and but I think they're great little small moments that really show you the difference between the two. And I think some of the animated movies and series really capture that better than we've unfortunately gotten in any of the movies yet.
Mm-hmm.
So there's some great moments just comparing the two of them and the relationship that they have with people around them and how that's different, that I think kind of exemplifies what their relationship with each other is. Like in Young Justice, when Superboy kind of shows up for the first time, it's actually Batman who's the better Bat dad, I guess, than Superman is, because Superman doesn't know what to do. He doesn't have that kind of, and I think, Jacob, what you're talking about with a lot of the getting to see Superman as a father. We don't, obviously he doesn't have any of that in most of the comics. There's no watching him train someone or bring someone under his wing, where we get that time and time again with Batman. And I think that's probably more about who Batman is the family he's built around him, and that's a better depiction of who he is than pretty much anything else he does, because if you look at what he does, he's actually a sociopath. Mm-hmm. But you see that they're in that episode of Young Justice where Superboy is like looking at Robin and seeing this relationship that Robin has with Batman and realizing, like, what the hell, like, why don't I get anyone to kind of show me the ropes to take care of me? And Batman's the one who goes up to Superman. It's kind of like, what are you doing? Like, help him out. And I think there's a little moments like that you realize that they keep each other human in ways that they wouldn't be able to do without themselves. And, in talking about New 52 stuff, the Flashpoint, I was talking with a friend of mine the other day about, Batman's depiction as Thomas Wayne. And, they're like, oh, well, it's because, Bruce dies and not Thomas and Martha, and that's why he's this no-holds-barred, cutthroat, like, shooting people Batman. And my friend actually reminded me, he's like, well, he also doesn't have Superman. Yeah. Superman is locked away the whole time. He never sees the sun. He's never actually been a part of Batman's development as a hero, as a character, as, Bruce. That whole side of him is missing. And I found that a way more satisfying explanation as to why he just goes so dark so quickly with no one to kind of counterbalance him. Because there really is only one other person that can face off against Batman and Superman.
Yeah.
So for me, it's like they keep each other human. And like I love the little back and forth that we definitely get to see more in, in like Justice League Unlimited, or probably the most in Justice League Unlimited. You get to actually get a sense of like their character together.
Yeah, no, that's a good point, because the what's his face, the string bean Superman is like locked away in like Red Sun hell.
Yeah,
Slenderman, Superman,
yeah.
Superman is rendered by Tim Burton.
Yeah, exactly. The loneliest boy, Superman. No, yeah.
Also, something we haven't talked about yet, and it's like a huge fucking problem in the movies, is we have not had one decent villain in a Superman movie.
Yeah.
It drives me crazy, because there's really nobody better than Clancy Brown as Lex Luthor. And it's just like, I miss him, and I want someone that has the same gravitas, like the same presence and the same fear just in his voice, because I think that's such a big part of Lex Luthor. And so I've already gotten like a whiny teenager.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then like this hammy
Gene Hackman.
transition.
Yeah.
Oh my God. Like it's just a mess.
Yeah.
And
Mind
then,
before matter.
I like Michael Shannon, but his Zod was goddamn nightmare.
Oh, yeah. I mean, the one thing, like, I saw Man of Steel multiple times in theaters.
You'll have to forgive Kal-El.
Yeah.
He doesn't know our ways.
Yeah. Where you grow up a farm? And he's like, shh, his performance is the one that falls apart the most every time I watch it.
Yeah.
To be fair, I think we've talked about this. I think an instant fix to your introduction to Zod is if we don't actually get that whole bullshit.
Oh yeah,
kind of like day after tomorrow crap
with the dick ships that float up into the Phantom Zone.
Yes. Like it should just start with Zod shows up on your TV, and he's like, just shows up as an alien invading with no context. That's a lot scarier than some whiny bitch that's been locked up in a mirror. Like, it just doesn't do anything for me. Like,
what did you think of Terrence Stamp?
What again?
Terrence Stamp from Superman 2.
It still didn't feel like someone that Superman should be frightened of.
Mm-hmm. He's just in this like ridiculous outfit.
Well, they're all wearing ridiculous outfits.
Yeah.
I mean, for me, it's all about Michael Rosenbaum from Smallville. You know, I mean, granted,
straight up makes an old lady die when she sees what he'll become.
Sees his vision, but like his thing is, and unfortunately, I think towards the end they kind of screwed up a little bit with his Lex Luthor. But he's got obviously, him and Tom Welling obviously have 10 years to really flesh their characters out. But I think that was something where seeing their relationship, and they do a good job of not trying to like wink at the audience too much that the fact that they're going to be like enemies, the greatest enemies they've ever had kind of thing.
I think they did a good job because actually, watching Ethan, for those of you who don't know, Ethan's my fiance.
Yep.
Also hardcore Superman fan. Watching Smallville together, and I would say he's even more of a Superman fan than I am.
We need to get Ethan on the show.
Yeah. Ethan could talk for a long time about Superman, but watching how crestfallen he was when they kind of ended the storyline. They have Lex Luthor and they have Clark Kent kind of go through this almost like buddy cop phase, like early on, like on to season 2 or 3, where they're kind of like solving shit together. Mm-hmm. And Ethan was like, I could watch this show, like them solving crimes in Smallville.
Yeah.
All day long. And then when they have that friendship start to sour, and then the suspicion comes in and the lies, it's like watching an actual relationship fall apart. And the whole like the brother I never had, the family I never had, all these different layers. That's a more heartbreaking development and gives you more to go on. Why these people could come to hate each other so much, than to just be like, oh, well, you're the most powerful man in the world, and I'm the smartest man in the world, and there's nothing for us to do except for fight. It just shows, again, the more human qualities in us, and when we're betrayed by the people we think we love, our often reaction is immediate hatred. You get blinded and do things that you might not otherwise do. It sends Michael Rosenbaum's character totally down this path of no return.
Yeah.
Until he's, standing in a field, raining blood on his head. So.
Well, I mean, that's the thing too. Like, because we, obviously, we all know that's coming. So, like you said, when they do start to splinter it, and we know that, obviously, Clark's keeping secrets from Lex, which he takes personally, and Lex is, his father, really, Lionel is really the villain for the early seasons. I mean, like, he's the guy really doing everything, and really you get to see why Lex becomes this kind of scared kid and how he's affected by the meteor shower. They're all affected. How far, like, did you finish Smallville, or?
We didn't.
Okay. I just didn't want to spoil anything.
We had to move to Portland and kind of got behind, and then started watching all the other shows. But I mean, it did kind of go off the rails for a while. Mm-hmm. I think it was season 7 or 8. We were just, what is happening in this show? And I'm sure we're going to go back and finish it. But those early seasons, as things were really kind of kicking off for Clark and figuring out who he is as Superman, that was what I loved. But anything that goes on for 10 seasons. I think there's always 1 or 2 seasons where they stray too far away from what makes that show. And every now and again, I think Smallville had moments of that.
I mean, you and I have talked the supernatural effect multiple times.
Yes. I had to stop.
Well, I mean, like, yeah, with Smallville, it gets to a point where, like, season 9, I think I was like, just finish. I want to see how this ends. Yeah. I want to see the moment of, like, hope and the moment of, because the whole, like, back half of that series is everyone is telling Clark to basically become Superman. And he's like, I don't know. Maybe I'll just be the Red Blue Blur, which is the worst fucking name.
Or wear the Matrix outfit.
Oh, yeah. I think it's season 8 where, like, the Dark Knight had come out and he, like, is wearing a trench coat with, like, a black shirt and, like, 5'11" pants. And he's like, you're like, oh, okay. Yeah, Smallville is one of those things, like, the movie, most of the movies, I can watch and have, fun doing it, and Superman Returns is one of those. But for me, Superman's been done, so well on the small screen with, the Fleischer stuff being the primo Superman stuff for me. Like, that's the stuff I'll always go back to because, they're really kind of like bite-sized episodes too, so you can watch them kind of
the done in one stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And then, Smallville being kind of this, in my opinion, my favorite, live adaptation of Superman. And it's because, like you were saying earlier on, Corey, like, it's about Clark Kent. Like the Smallville, people always talk about the different personas, but that Smallville Clark Kent is, for me, that's the real guy. That's the guy, he wants to be. And he, the times where he can go home to Smallville and, see his mom. That, in Superman Returns, that's one of my favorite things, seeing him reflect on becoming, learning his powers in those flashbacks of him, like, running through the field. And
yeah, I wish there was more of that.
Yeah. I remember when I saw the trailer for that, I thought there was going to be a lot more, and it's kind of really just it's a nice little scene, but him kind of coming home to recharge at Smallville is always a nice thing to see. So
yeah, and I think also some of the things that burned me out on Smallville, and this is like a larger problem, especially in movies, is the romantic interest for superheroes is always something that I think their relationship with whoever their romantic interest is really important because it shows the audience what's important to that hero. And, you have Lois Lane as this, hard ass, like, ball busting, like, secret of truth.
Mm-hmm.
And then, Lana is kind of this more wholesome girl next door who knows inherently what's right. But the characterization in Smallville of Lana just goes crazy. Like,
it's terrible.
Crazy. And you're like, what the hell is happening on the show? And I had heard so much from you guys. Oh, you're gonna love Lois. You're gonna love Lois. You're gonna love Lois. Mm-hmm. I couldn't stand Lois. I thought she was annoying as hell. And, like, I just was like, where is this person who's worthy of Clark Kent? I haven't found. And, I think, we got Lois Lane's characterization in Man of Steel. There's nothing to her. We have, like, no reason why he should be so in love with her. It doesn't make sense to me.
Mm-hmm.
And, I think that's what, Charles Soule's Superman and Wonder Woman, you get all of these great moments. And yes, we haven't seen a real love story of Superman and Wonder Woman in any of the modern retellings of Superman on silver screen, but you do get a sense of why they would love each other so much, how different they are, and the struggles they face, while similar, come from completely different angles about who they are and how they come to be a part of the human world. And it's just one of those things where I feel like I will never be totally satisfied. Like, even in Superman Returns, Lois Lane, I don't see it.
Yeah,
I just don't understand. Like, they just have flat characters, which I don't even know the comics have done particularly well with. So it's one of those things that hopefully we get to, if we're actually going to go for developing a relationship in a superhero movie or a comic, that we get more than, well, we wanted to make Batman and Catwoman get married so we could have something special to have happen in this issue, but there's like a reason for it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the Lois playing the mom in Rebirth right now is she's still like the ball buster, but also being the one to be like, all right, kids, like referring to Clark, like stop flying. It's, time to come home and do shit, or, Superman's the kind of guy who's like, oh, we're going to go out and do stuff. She's like, no, he's got, she's the one who can tell Superman to stop being a dummy. And like I said, it's interesting in the comics, and like, who knows? I mean, I'm super excited. We've talked about Frank Miller. He's doing the Superman Year One with John Romita Jr., which I know for some people is like a nightmare, but I love Frank Miller no matter what. And John Romita Jr., even when he's like square hand people, I still love it. I don't know why. I just do. I just fucking do. And I'm excited because I think Frank Miller genuinely loves Superman, and I think a lot of people get the wrong idea from the Dark Knight Returns.
Gave him a massive dick.
He did, yeah. I had the shirt to prove it. Yeah, he drew Superman's dick. But I mean, because again, he's he said when he was a little kid he used to wear Superman pajamas under his clothes to feel what it would be like to be Superman when he went to school. Mm-hmm. And he's writing Superman through Batman's eyes. Now he's writing Superman through his own eyes, and I think a exciting bit of that is the end of the Dark DK3, the Master Race, where they had those mini comics inside that he would draw as well. Mm-hmm. And there's the final issue of that is him talking to his daughter, and introducing her to the human race, not the superhuman race. And it's a really kind of sweet moment where the entire issue is him suiting up as Clark Kent, not Superman. And that made me excited when I heard when we were in San Diego that they announced that they're going to do the Superman Year One. So who knows? There's always going to be Superman stuff, down the road, down the line. Corey, any final Superman related things you wanted to speak of before we wrap this thing up?
I think if you're not already a Superman fan, he's one that's worth giving a chance. I think there are so many things that are out in the show that kind of are a little more glitzy, and whether because of violence or some major crossover, it's really kind of worth going back to the beginning. A lot of the John Byrne stuff you were talking about.
Mm-hmm.
I don't necessarily. It can be a risky thing when you're a retailer to send someone back that far because it can be a turnoff. If you're a new fan of comics, and I tell you go back 40 years,
yeah.
So sometimes you're like, oh no, but I think it's really worth it. And he's a character that has such a long history and such a rich history that it's worth taking the time to kind of play comics historian and kind of go back to the beginning of everything. Even in the writers who created him, there's such a rich history, and kind of learning about their story and how that all came to be is just super worth it.
Yeah.
I think sometimes there's a hesitancy to go back and look at the origin of everything beyond the character and look at the creators. And definitely coming from a creator-owned company, that's something that I wish more fans were familiar with and kind of place priority on. So I feel like do your homework. If you want to be a Superman fan, like do your homework.
Yeah, I mean, kind of like Batman. You gotta look for it, but I think there's a story and there's a moment for everyone that they can relate to with Superman, like they would like. I mean, if they want Superman uppercutting Doomsday into the moon and beating him to dust because he doesn't like that he's fucking with the family, then Superman Doomed is for you. Or if you want the smaller mm-hmm. moments, like I said, if you go to like a list of like the top Superman stories of all time, the kind of back and forth have always been All-Star Superman, which I would not recommend for a first-time Superman reader because, like I said, it is kind of like a final exam. It's very heavy. It's very good, but there's a lot going on in it. And Birthright I think would be a good place. Lionel Yu draws Superman like a fucking shit brick house, which is like the way he should be drawn.
Superman for All Seasons, where Tim Sale apparently got criticism for drawing him like a thumb.
Yeah. But I think Superman for All Seasons is a really good place to start.
Oh, it's like a Rockwell painting come to life.
Yeah.
I think that that's if you're listening to this, that's a good one to start with. That was when I became a born again Superman fan. That was the first story I read, and I was just like, oh my god. So yeah, well, Corey, you've done good by all of us. You've gone from when I first met you as a clerk at a comic shop to the head of retail sales at Image Comics. So that's pretty
Director of sales.
Director of sales. That's pretty damn good.
No, thanks, guys. And I know I tell you both this all the time, and it's I think something worth repeating that those people who love comics and people who keep the fire alive, which I'm sure you guys can attest to this. Sometimes you get your deadlines, you look at the interviews you have to do. It's easy to kind of forget why you got into it, and podcasts like this, it's really nice to remember and be reminded that. How we first got into these things and why we keep reading them however many years later is worth remembering.
Well, yeah, appreciate that. And like I said, one of the reasons we wanted to do this was to be able to document that for all times, because if the world ever exploded like Krypton, I think you'd agree with me, Sam.
Don't give it any ideas.
No. If the world ever exploded like Krypton and we had to send one person to a far-off planet to become their champion, it would be Corey Murphy.
Woman of Steel.
Woman of Steel, Corey Murphy.
Hey, that's very sweet of you guys.
You the best. Thank you so much, Corey. This has been another episode of the Superman Sessions. I'm Jake.
I'm Sam.
Good night.
Night. Bum, 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 bum. This has been another Geek Out production. If you enjoyed what you heard, hey, we've got a special episode every Friday. Of course, there's the usual catching up show every Wednesday. And you get book club episodes just about every Tuesday these days. Thanks for listening.